Yeah, I gotta move the bench first. So those are all 18-foot 2x6 I got from a barn teardown last summer. They've been in storage waiting for a project, and finally I think I'm going to use them for a very stout workbench. So I'm going to cut them in half into like 8 or 9 foot sections, and then I'm going to laminate them into a giant butcher block style workbench. These used to be ceiling joists, so you can tell they sagged over the years, and we're going to have to cut them on a table saw to straighten them out. I use a little block of wood to space my straight edge. It makes it real easy to be consistent. You can see you start at almost nothing, and then we cut to about 3/8 deep, and then down to almost nothing again. I ended up ripping both sides. This gives you a better idea of what the cut looks like. I ended up running the wood through my planer. I don't have a joiner. Seemed to work okay. I wanted my bench to be about 4 feet off the back wall and centered in the shop, so I took the time to locate the legs. This sheet of plywood is the same size as the bench. I used it to locate the feet. I'm doing this because I want to shoot grade. This floor has got a pitch to it, and I need to cut the legs appropriately to make the top of the bench level. So I'm just using a water level here, and I'm marking a story pole and marking the locations of the legs respectively. So this is all the legs that are cut up, and I'm starting the assembly of the A-frames. There's one on each side. It's really important to get these right. These are going to control the rest of the bench build. So you want them to be square and flush and strong. I chose good lumber for it, the best of the pile at least. I'm just marking out the pre-drills for the screws. I'm using that top block to mark the lower block. This ends up being about 3 layers thick for the legs, because it's 4.5 inch wide and it's 1.5 inch lumber, so that ends up being a 4.5 by 4.5 leg. So I also marked the locations of these screws 1 foot on center because I wanted them to be in a very specific location, so if I ever drill through the table again, I know where they are. I carried that throughout the entire bench. So I'm making sure there's no twist, making sure everything's square. You'll see here in a second I'm going to do the carpenter square, the 3-4-5, and I'm just checking to make sure that the legs are square to the top. This bench is going to have a shelf in it halfway up, so I need to cut a notch to let in the ledgers for the shelf. So that's what I'm doing here. I don't know if you caught that, but there were some sparks. I hit a screw there. This design is strictly let form fit function. I just wanted a strong, stout, heavy bench that wouldn't move. And when you're dealing with reclaimed lumber, you're not really too concerned with looks anyway. So there's the notch. You can see that I'm going to have ledgers going both ways there. And this is the long one, the 8-foot ledger. I round over the edges of my workbenches just because I don't like splinters. And I wouldn't be able to get in there after it's assembled, so route it first. Here I am checking level to make sure everything's okay. I also designed it to be level with the rest of my benches. Worked out great. There's the other ledger, getting put into the notches. So I framed this just like a little floor. 2-foot centers. And now I'm spacing out the upper portion to be the appropriate width. Because after I'm done laminating this, I want it to end up exactly at the right width. So this is the shelf stock. I'm cutting notches for the legs. Now I didn't know this, but it doesn't fit with those spreaders on the top. I fought it for a while. And I ended up having to take those upper spreaders loose to be able to get it in there. Ended up fitting well though. I'm just fastening this down. It doesn't take too many screws, it's just going to be sitting there, so countersink. I'm about to make a crazy glue mess, so that's what the paper's for. Here I am marking centers on the pieces that are going to be the bench top. Same deal. I want all the screws in a very specific location so I know that I'm not going to hit them later when I drill through the top. If I ever need to do any like bench dogs or any kind of clamping mechanism, I won't hit the screws. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting the angle iron up to keep the distance apart and also to be able to clamp to it to hold up the pieces as I glue it. And I move the wood pieces to the inside so I could literally set the piece to be glued down on them. And then I can clamp. You'll see here in a second. I think the lamination process took maybe even 4.5 hours, maybe 5. Crazy mess. I ran into trouble here. My glue up was starting to curve. And that A-frame was a little bent too, so I needed to make up the difference. So I came up with this little jig to basically cut this piece to match that curve. That top piece I chose specifically for this. I felt that it would bend the most consistently out of all the lumber. I'm checking here to see if the curve has the right progression. I just ran it through the table saw. So now I'm going to clean up that edge. I can't believe how well this worked. I mean, it matched that curve perfectly. Very, very pleased with that solution. I ended up having to use my right angle driver to get some of the screws in. And then later on I realized if I just use a really long bit, I could get in there just by driving past the lumber in front of it. Still pretty difficult to do when it gets that tight. Now we're getting down to the last couple. So I'm going to just drive 10-inch lag bolts through and clamp the rest that way. The only reason I'm doing this is I don't have clamps big enough to clamp this bench. So this was my solution. You can see I'm using beeswax. Makes that bit drill easier. Here's the last two. Another trick I use is 100% silicone on lag bolts. It is like magic. I had to clamp it up, so you can see those clamps are at an angle. I had them up on a block of wood that was screwed to the bench because they wouldn't go to the far end of it. And while that was drying, I hopped under there and scraped up the glue. Now this process was interesting. I wasn't sure how I was going to tackle flattening this, but as I started sliding the levels around, I realized that the aluminum was actually marking the high spots. So I just used those levels literally to scuff marks, high spot marks in the table over and over again. And I just iterated. You do the planer first, then you do the belt sander, mark it again, progress with the grits. Finally sanded. I think I went down to maybe, I don't know, 150 grit. So in the end, I managed to build this bench for under $100. I purchased the medite, the screws, and the glue, and I got all the wood for free. It ended up being about 850 pounds. I used 44 2x6s that were 8 feet long. I used 1.5 gallons of glue, about 600 screws, and it took about 40 hours to complete. Well worth it. I have a list of tools and materials to build this bench in the description. And if you want to see my newest videos, please subscribe. Thank you.